Welcome to our update on food safety rules for small producers and co-ops with Roger Noonan and Suzette Snow-Cobb. Thank you very much for joining us. We're excited to have you both here. I want to begin this presentation with a few slides. My name is Jason Valcourt, and I am the conference coordinator. Happy to be here. We'd like to begin by reminding everyone that we are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on this map and honor those whose land you now occupy. I will paste this link inside the chat as long as with some other links as well. And we have provided some resources here for you to engage with that we are aspiring to engage with as well. Basic Zoom etiquette is that you are muted upon entry, and you may be able to come off of mute if the presenters would like to invite that at some point, but you can feel free to use the chat function, and we will watch and monitor the chat and bring those questions to the speakers. Of course, we cannot do this work without the support of our generous sponsors. Please familiarize yourself with them and visit their websites and their ads inside our program book as well. You can find them there. We have a nice collection of supportive sponsors that we appreciate and rely upon. Our online auction is live. You can bid on some fantastic items at this link, which again, I will post into the chat. Please support NOFA and go home with, or stay at home with some fantastic items that have been donated to our auction. And please frequent our virtual vendors, which have provided some live videos inside our program book. You can scroll through the program book and discover their videos that are informative, and you can visit their websites as well through the program book. So hope that you will enjoy their contributions. That is the end of my introductions here. So now I'll invite Suzette and Roger to take over. You can screen share if you wish, and take it away.
Thank you, Jason. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Roger Noonan. I'm an organic vegetable grower, run a diversified farm in New Boston, New Hampshire, and I serve as the president of the New England Farmers Union, and I'm on the board of the National Farmers Union, and I'm also a member of the local Food Safety Collaborative, which is an FDA grant program that funds the National Farmers Union to conduct food safety outreach, training, and education to local and regional food producers. Suzette?
Sure, and you can see the slide shares.
Yes, thank you,
okay,
Suzette.
Great. Well, I'm Suzette Snow-Cobb. I work for the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, and I'm here to support Roger in his presentation, and also am a New England Farmers Union member, and working with the local Food Safety Collaborative to help bring you this information too.
All right. And if anyone has questions at any time, we'll go ahead and we'll take them as we roll through. All right. So why don't we go to the next slide? The goal of this presentation is to provide an update on the food safety regulations affecting, I said, small entities, because some viewers may be farmers, some may be small-scale processors, some may be both. So the rules and regulations are different for each sector. We're going to do a brief overview so you understand where you fit into the rule, or if you do fit into the rule.
Hey, Roger, sorry. Which one are you seeing? Are you seeing the update?
I'm seeing the title page, yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's see. For some reason, it worked before. No? All right. All right, let's see. Gonna stop that for a moment. Sorry about that. Okay, and then this. And then, there we go. Got it now.
Thanks. Just quickly, the Local Food Safety Collaborative, our goal is to provide these resources to the local and regional farmers. In the industry, the big growers have plenty of support and grower organizations and groups like that, which we work with to provide the best information that's directly applicable to small growers. Next slide, please. Our outreach and training to small fruit and vegetable growers and processors is fairly well distributed across the country. Next slide, please. And these are some of our partners, including National Young Farmers Coalition, various farmers union chapters, Kentucky Hort Council, Tilth Alliance, and National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition out of DC. Next slide. I'm seeing the whole slide there. So anyway, this our needs assessment we conducted in a few years ago. 70% of the surveyed producers and processors we're not even sure if they'd ever had a third-party audit. The largest barrier to implementing food safety practices was reported to be the expense. And only 30% of local producers had a written food safety plan. This, I think, is about 4-year-old data. And next slide, please. We have about a bunch of resources on the LFSC website, which is linked to at the end of this slide deck. Next slide, please. These are just things that we've done over time. We actually don't have a post survey to do. Next slide, please. Okay, so I put this in because for small farms that are not necessarily covered by the regulation and do not have to comply with the specific provisions of FSMA, and all farms in general, anyone that's working with food, what we need to develop is this culture of food safety. And growers, many of the growers I work with will spend a lot of time thinking about the environmental impacts of what they're doing. You're looking for bugs. You walk into the field or the greenhouse, you are taking in all kinds of data and assessing it. What's my weed pressure, my pest pressure, other insects, is the fruit ripening? What can I do about improving that? And one of the things we also need to do is think about the food safety implications of everything we're doing on the farm. Because food safety is everyone's job, and the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act mandates that we have to put, we cannot put adulterated produce or adulterated food into the marketplace. So it's our responsibility. We're the sort of first line of defense. And I think one of the things that COVID taught us is that there are a lot of vulnerable people out there. And for those of us that do local foods and are organic, we already have a very high level of awareness about the safety of our food, perhaps more from the chronic aspect than the acute. when we're talking about food safety, in particular relative to FDA, we're talking about acute. We're talking about, bacteria, pathogens that can potentially make people sick. So we need to include that into our thinking when we're out on the farm. And the smaller your farm is, there are challenges, but there are also some advantages to being small and have fewer employees that can potentially upset the apple cart on food safety. But the important thing is it's got to be mindful about food safety, and it's got to be right up on top of that list with your yield, productivity, with your quality, with your stewardship of your land and animals. Put food safety right up there on that pedestal as well. Next slide, please. So real quick, what is FSMA? FSMA was enacted in 2011 after several years of debate and sort of as an outgrowth of some major foodborne illness outbreaks. And it establishes requirements for a hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls for facilities that produce food for animals. That's the preventive controls rule. And then you have the produce safety rule, which establishes for the first time specific rules and regulations relative to the growing of food. Next slide, please. So produce is any fruit or vegetable, including mushrooms, sprouts, peanuts. These things are produce. And that's an important term to define going forward. And produce that is used for personal or on-farm consumption is excluded from the rule. So if you are growing food for yourself, or you have an Airbnb or bed and breakfast on the farm, and you're just producing food for that, you are exempt from the produce safety rule and the PCR. You may be covered under other rules, local rules of jurisdiction relative to, restaurants or other food code rules. Next slide, please. Excluded from that produce are those things that are rarely consumed raw. This is an exhaustive list of 34 items that are not covered. So if you're just growing potatoes, then you're not subject to the produce safety rule, but you are still subject to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So you wouldn't want to be putting, an adulterated product into the marketplace for that. Next slide, please. And there's a couple of big exemptions to the produce safety rule. So the first one that applies to most growers, I think, in the Northeast, or many growers anyway, is a qualified exempt. So it's less than $500,000 of total of all foods sales. So if you're a dairy farmer and you're doing $499,000 worth of milk, and you're doing just a few dollars worth of something else, you would be covered under this rule. Because all food, which includes hay, which includes animal, income from animals, sales of animals, is counted in that. The other thing that to get this qualified exemption is that it has to be a qualified end user, which is direct to the store, direct to a restaurant, direct to a consumer, and it has to be within your state or within 275 miles away from your farm. So if you're in Rhode Island, you've got 275 away from that, your farm gate, and if you're in California, you can still go from the tip to the tail to the tip of the state of California, and it's got to be 50.1% or of those local food sales, right? There's also adjusted for inflation. I don't know. Next slide, please. I don't think I included I didn't update the chart, but it just it adjusts for inflation by, I think it's about 3%. Another exemption, it's more of an exclusion if you're in $25,000 or less over a 3-year average of produce sales. So you just have, say, a high tunnel or two, and you're just doing tomatoes, and your sales are under $25,000. you would also be exempt from the rule. And this is just, we can go to the next one. Next slide. So your state may require you, if they inspect you, even if you are exempt farm, to sort of prove that your sales have averaged, below either threshold. And there's a sample form there. As we get closer to exempt farms getting these visits, you may see that your state has a specific form they want you to use. And if you're a covered farm, then you won't be doing this. You'll be actually showing how you're complying with the rule during an inspection. Next slide, please. Registration. The Bioterrorism Act requires certain facilities to register. If you are a farm, then you are exempt from registration, and you're exempt from the preventive controls rule. Jason, are you raising your hand, or are you just adjusting your microphone? I was like, okay, all right, thank you. So that registering under the, say, for example, if you have a sugar house, you may be registered as a facility under the Bioterrorism Act, but you're also a farm, and so you still have to register your facility if you're doing something that requires registration on your farm. Primary production farm is the farm itself. Now, this is part of the update would be to tell you that FDA is looking at the definition of a farm and is going to modify that definition. They have yet to do so. We don't have any indication of when they're going to release that. I don't have any indication. Next slide, please. Whoop, did we skip over a whole bunch, or back up one? Yeah.
That's what I got. You missing some?
Yes.
Oh dear.
Okay. So the other thing is a secondary activities farm, which is, say, that farm that is doing maybe some value-added processing that meets the requirements, and we're missing half the slide deck there too, evidently. Suzette, I'm gonna
let me stop sharing.
Yeah.
And then you can.
But I'll just talk through some updates here. Again, that's one of the instances where we are waiting for some further definitions, or probably it'll have to be a rule making that they'll do on the definition of a farm. Don't have a date on that, but the big one that is forthcoming is the water rule, which is anticipated to be released later this month. And currently, if you are a small farm, in 2019, FDA released an update to the compliance dates, and we're looking at, see, I'm just going to scroll through my notes since I don't have my slide. So larger farms will now have to comply with the ag water requirements by January 26th, 2022. Small farms have until January 26th, 2023, and very small farms until January 26th, 2024. Can you go back a couple? Are you still working on
that? No, I checked. There's just the one that you sent had just a couple more slides.
Yeah, there was just a couple more. Yeah.
Okay. I can reshare again. Hold on.
Yeah. So the compliance dates were extended, and we don't know if they will extend those compliance dates again because they're releasing a new water rule. Let me stop at the go back one.
Back one?
Yeah, one more. Okay. So this is large, small, very small. No, that's not the right one. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going. Next slide.
That's all.
And I thought there was a couple more in between the two.
Yeah.
Secondary activities farm. Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'm just going to jump back to explaining the water rule. Or what we know about the water rule. They have extended those deadlines. Most farms are going to be small or very small. So we're looking at 2023 and 2024. Again, not knowing if they will actually extend those once again, depending on, they're going to release a rule supposedly in August. They will have a comment period of some 60 to 120 days where organizations will digest what they're asking for, explain it to farmers, and hopefully solicit feedback from farmers to improve the rule. And I encourage anyone that's viewing this to follow up on this rule, because the FDA needs to understand how the rule is going to work on your farm. If rules are unworkable for our farms, then we can't implement them and we can't, do what we need to do. So the other rule I guess there's really no other rule. We're also waiting for their guidance document. So when the federal agency gets a mandate from Congress, creates a law is created, they make a rule, and then when they implement the rule through regulation, they usually also list a guidance document. And the guidance document is examples of how to comply, and they usually have multiple examples to address something. So I think in 2016 they released the draft guidance document. Of course, without a final water rule, that section is not complete. So perhaps once they get this final water rule, we'll see a guidance document. And the guidance document is what your technical service provider, whether it's an extension agent or a state regulator or any other educator, would be referring to in how to interpret the regulation. Because the regulations sometimes they're very pointed, and sometimes they're open to interpretation. And the guidance helps let you know what the agency's thinking is at any time.
Yes. Roger, sorry. Can you clarify the water rule?
The water rule essentially says that the water you use in pre-harvest, so in your ag water, we're talking about agricultural water here, the water you use on your crops, in the field, in the packing shed, that it has to be safe and adequate for its intended use. And part of in that broad statement, what they've said is, in the initial rule, they had a very complex testing methodology, and they required testing, and the standard they used was the EPA's recreational water testing standard. And then there's been several iterations of confusion and back and forth with the industry over the water rule, resulting in the FDA taking that feedback, and now we're on the cusp of a new water rule being issued. But I think the thing that we need to understand on the farm side is, especially for those farms that may not be covered by the rule, so you'll never have an inspector say you need to do X, Y, or Z. But what we should do, applying that culture of food safety to our farms, what I would suggest folks do is get your water tested. Use the USDA GAP standard. Get it tested at the beginning of the season, get it tested in the middle season, and at the end of the season. There are other times when you may want to consider testing and using that generic E. coli test, which FDA has a guidance document on. I'm not sure we included it in our links, but I'll make sure we update this. I'll update this last page with a link to some testing info. I didn't get too crazy about putting too much water stuff on this link because everything may change. I really don't know what they will change it to. But for those of us that are not regulated under the rule, I think the important thing to consider is your water safe? Would you drink it? And if you wouldn't drink it, I mean, you can still apply. There are things that farmers apply to their crops that you wouldn't drink, even organic farmers. But we think about the time, like a restricted entry interval in spraying a pesticide. Maybe I'm using pond water, which I'm totally fine using to sort of set germination on my crops. But maybe as that lettuce is nearing maturity, maybe I don't want to use that water. That maybe I've switched over to a well water. So it's about thinking about that and having that in your mind. Like we've got a farm pond, and I know a lot of us in the beginning of the season were probably were very worried about drought. I mean, we were in a moderate drought up my way, and as you're using surface water for irrigation, you got to think about how you're going to apply it and the timing of it, and also once you start sucking the bottom of your stream, your pond, you're going to, that's where you're going to pick up those nutrients. So those pathogens rather that may impact your crop. Now, we go into excessive moisture conditions as we've had for much of July. And now we've got standing water in the fields in many cases. And and also, typically we don't irrigate during high, moisture situations. But in our high tunnels and greenhouses, using a pond or a stream, excuse me, you have a lot of runoff potentially. Contaminating that water source, right? You often, you see all those silts and sediments roaring down a river. They can all carry pathogens. If there's, animal operations upstream from you, that can all be problematic for you. I just see something in the chat box. So you're monitoring that, so I don't need to worry about that. Okay. So another thing that and again, I'm not going to predict what's inside the forthcoming water rule, other than to say there probably will be a test required, and it makes good sense to know where your water is at, and if you're not covered by the rule, the extent of that testing is something that you're really going to have to consider in view of the known or foreseeable risks around your farm. So if you got livestock on your farm upstream of your water source or close to your well, you need to think about that regardless of your status under the regulations, right? Is that a food safety concern? Are they adequately far away? Most of us are making compost or something on the farm. Do I drive am I using that loader to then, bring the squash up from the field? And did I adequately clean the bucket? Am I driving the manure spreader or a wagon full of compost or manure past my vegetable production area? Excuse me. We need to be aware of those chances for cross-contamination, and they've got to be as front of mind, like I said, in that to develop a food safety culture, it has to be as front of mind as everything else you're doing, which you keep front of mind as a farmer. Any other questions?
Was there a question in the chat or no?
No.
Okay. So, well, I had a question, Roger, and if if the other participants had any thoughts on this, is if you've given a lot of background and some resources, but if people wanted to do food safety training, what would be some next step after this? What would be what might they do if they wanted to find out more?
Well, there are several, depending on the scale of your operation and what your goals are. If you are, I'd say at a minimum, you'd want to take the Produce Safety Alliance training. It is a fantastic training, and you get this very large manual here that covers every section of the rule. and provides examples, and it's very applicable. I'd say it's very well done, and would not be alien to anybody that's doing any kind of commercial farming. I think the concepts of everything's very approachable in that. It is available online, and if you're and it's a required training if you're a covered farmer, but it's certainly an encouraged training. Is it going to make you a food safety expert? No, but it's a quick introduction. Manual's a great resource for later. The book and the title. Okay, the book goes, I just see a question here from Heather. The book, you will receive the book if you take the PSA training. We have a link. I'm looking at the link here to the Produce Safety Alliance. If there, you can go there. They'll show you where there are courses in the area, both in person and online. But I checked maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and there were none in New England. Of course, it's the middle of growing season now, but I expect in the fall we'll start seeing some pop up, and I would encourage folks to take it.
We're also collecting a list of names with the Farmers Union. If you know of someone, or if you yourself and you want to be in touch with either Roger or I, and if we get enough people to host a training, we'll schedule that.
Yep. Well, we can initiate a training. We have a couple of lead trainers, and we can do it virtually, which seems to work pretty well. I think by this point we're all pretty well seasoned at it, and I think it also allows some people to participate that couldn't pull away for 8 hours. And this sort of the next level training, and Suzette, I had sent these links to you before, I think, but you can take it up a notch if let's say you have buyer requirements. That is, you're selling to store X, and store X says you need a USDA GAP audit or a GFSI, Global Food Safety Initiative audit to sell to us. Well, you may still be a small farm, but maybe you're only doing a couple of high value products, say high kernel tomatoes or whatever it may be, and you want to get into that market. You can take Cornell offers a fantastic online GAPS program, and I shared. We have them, I think, posted them on our social media, but we'll include the links to those upcoming classes. And if you're in the processing or say food hub operator, or a food co-op or some sort, and you are interested in learning about good manufacturing practices relative to say warehousing or doing some on-farm value added, they also have a GMP course as well. We also have scholarship funds through the LFSC to support small scale growers gaining access to these programs. One of the Jason, go ahead.
I just want to bring your attention that Trinice has raised her hand.
Hi.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Trinice.
Hi, how are you?
I'm cold.
Well, thank you, first of all, for all this information. It's really helpful. I haven't even started like the process of farming yet, but I inherited a farm. And so the farm that I inherited I had a forester come out and they said that it was poorly managed prior to my inheriting it. And so I really believe that the very beginning, the first year, I just need to spend some time kind of looking and learning and doing the samples of the soil and things like that. But I also think a part of the beginning is to find out what the neighborhood might need, what my neighbors might need, what would be good to farm in the area. It's actually in Georgia. And so I guess some of my questions would be, do you have any links or anything that's available that would kind of help with figuring out the foundational aspects of beginning farming? Thank you.
Yeah, Trinice, well, congratulations on inheriting a farm. That is That's a great way to get started.
Yeah.
For those of us that didn't, it's an expense. Buying them is often it's very hard to do. So I will we'll get your email, Suzette, and I will connect you with some folks in Georgia that can be very helpful. Specifically, I'm not sure what part of Georgia you're in. You're outside of Atlanta, or
Rome, Georgia, Aragon, Georgia area, the Polk County area. It's northwest of Atlanta. It's about an hour and a half out from the Marietta area. And and it's even things like I need to figuring out how to run a tractor.
yeah,
I am blessed. I
yep,
have a
yep,
tractor. I have, things that I can that are part of the family, but
yep,
I need to figure out how to use some of those things. So it would be great.
yep.
Um,
And
yeah,
I wouldn't
thank you.
get, depending on, I don't know who your forester is, but oftentimes, you can
Mhm.
bring being managed is all depends on what your goals are for the property, So,
Mhm.
um, if it was a pine plantation and it was, and that's what it was being managed for, and it's not a pine plantation, well, then maybe, you know, there was, some mismanagement, but, you know, you have a clean slate essentially, right? As long as your soil is not toxic,
Right.
you can, and invasive species aren't really out competing you, and depending what your goals are, uh, personal goals. But farming is it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of education that you need to
Mhm.
take in. But I think it sounds like you're starting in the right direction. We'll get your email, and I'll connect you with some folks that in Georgia that can help you out.
That's great. Thank you very much. And yeah, it was a cattle farm prior, so
Yep.
there's a lot of invasive species like thistle and things that the
Yep.
cows did not want to eat, and they kind
Yep.
of just were able to graze wherever they wanted. It's about 150 acres.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, clean slate.
Yep.
Lots of opportunities to
Yep.
figure things out.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. I think one other thing back to the water rule, and Trinice, I'll just sort of address this to you, but if you were to think about your farm and you approach that farm through the lens of food safety, it's like, let's say you wanted it, means really sort of focused on, since the FSMA produce rule covers produce, we'll just sort of assume that you were going to grow some produce there, something that's collards and kale, some leafy green that for fresh market. You would look at the land and you'd say, okay, I've got good tillable land here, nice deep soil. What do I have a water source? Where is my water source? What is my water source? Do I have multiple water sources? Do I have adequate water for irrigation, for adding to my spray tank or my compost teas or whatever other things you may apply to the crops? And do I have adequate water, potable water for hand washing and sanitation, and post-harvest handling, cooling of the thing? So, and where is that water source? Is there a large, an old manure pile sitting next to that pond? Were the cows allowed to go into that pond? Is it got a high, pathogen load? Where am I drawing the water? So those are the kind of considerations. They call it, I think, a sanitary survey. In for big farms, but you just want to take this assessment, and also wildlife. Where is the wildlife? Is the wildlife coming down this pond? Do I have geese living in this pond? And anyone that knows how geese can be around the pond, know they can foul the pond pretty quick. They're large birds, but even ducks can. So, those are sort of that baseline analysis, and especially if you're into growing vegetables or tree fruit, anything like that, water is something you need to grow with it. So you also want to ensure that it's not going to impact on the food safety. I think other things you want to know about that are reasonably foreseeable. This isn't really related to sort of produce safety, but maybe get some of those tests for, heavy metals, maybe PFAS, PFOAs. You want to know where you're standing at with some of these things that aren't necessarily directly regulated, but you may want to know, whether you have, for example, we've got a field, and next to it is an old gas station, and so we know that there's NBTE. We get the notice from the state that this tanks had leaked over time, so we could never drill a well for that field to secure water. So we actually use river water, which doesn't have the groundwater contamination relative to the field that has a gas station next to it. So those are just sort of doing that assessment, and it's an ongoing assessment too, because even once you get started in your sort of your food safety assessments, you want to, if you're you want to be aware of what's going on. Was there I'm trying to think of examples. If you get a heavy rain, for example, you may want to consider, is my drafting site protected? If I do need to irrigate, typically, you can get a heavy rain and upstream of you, and you may be in dry weather, but suddenly the river is raging and brown, and you're still irrigating. Well, there may be heavier pathogen loads in there. So do you just modify how you approach that irrigation? Can you use another water source, a potable water source if it's overhead? Are you using drip irrigation, which generally doesn't touch the crop, so has been assumed to be not in direct contact with the crop, although we may see a different interpretation relative to some drip irrigation. And the other thing is, when you're small, the cost of doing everything is you have a higher cost. You have limited acreage, so therefore, whatever things you do, your recovery of that investment is going to take longer. So we try to look for. That's why you have these exemptions built into the rule to provide some regulatory flexibility for small entities. Because if you're a 1,000-acre farm and it's going to cost you, $10,000 for your water system upgrades to, whether it's filtration, testing regime, divided over the number of acres, it's not going to impact the final cost of your product. On the other side, if you've only got a couple acres and you got to spend $10,000, well, that might be the end of your farm. Yes, also I just see Trini said that NRCS has some great resources and programs. That's the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the USDA. There's nothing that's necessarily directly tied to food safety there, but in those things that help improve the overall resiliency of your land, so riparian buffers, that is buffers around the edges of your waterways, where you have outflows of, say, wastewater from a pack house. You wash produce, and where's that water going? Maybe it's heading down a grassed swale to a stream. There are there's fencing, there's drip irrigation cost share programs available, pollinator habitat. There's a whole host of excellent programs. They are competitive, based on impacts. So smaller farmers don't always score well, especially when they're in areas where there are a lot of large farms. But this administration is really putting a lot more money on the ground right now. So I'd encourage anyone that's got some resource concerns relative to food safety that may be addressed through a conservation program to definitely reach out to their local conservation district and or their local NRCS office.
Roger, there's probably a farmers union chapter in Georgia area, right? And there's also the Federation of Southern Co-ops.
That's right.
Might be a very good resource for just general farming information and peer support for farming. And I can put their link in there.
Those were exactly the two I was thinking of. And of course, Billy Mitchell, our LFSC, National Farmers Union training guru is Georgia-based and is a fantastic resource as well.
Great. Well, you covered lots of ground, Roger. And I was trying to share that last slide without having to share the whole slide,
The link slide?
Yeah. I'm gonna see if I can do that. Okay. Oops. Let's see. No. Okay. Well, we're right at the beginning. Let's see if I can not go too, there we go. You can see that? Our last slide? Okay.
Yep. Oh, we forgot to put well, we also have New England Farmers Union as well, but.
Figures, right?
Yeah. And, because we have been increasing sort of the social media posts on updates, and when this water rule drops, any other rules drops, I would encourage you to take a look at any of these feeds, including New England Farmers Union. Information will be posted. Expect to start seeing stuff from your extension folks once the rule comes out. Probably give them a week or two to read it and understand it. But I would also encourage everyone viewing this to get educated about the regulation, but even more importantly, get educated about improving non-farm food safety. It really is, the current Deputy Commissioner, Frank Yanis, he talks about this culture of food safety. And the more, over the 30 years I've been farming, we've come a long way in our approach to it. I can tell you when I started out, it wasn't, I came from sort of, hay, cattle, maple syrup, and, gradually sort of eased into more intensive vegetable production, through corn and pumpkins and now we do, kale and Swiss chard and all the standard CSA components, right? But it was an evolution, and so as I sort of grew into that or evolved into that, there were new considerations that I didn't have to worry about with sweet corn and pumpkins. And I just think if you put it up there, I know there's sessions today about organic farming and climate, and we think about that. What can I do to reduce my plastic use in the farm? Well, what can I do to reduce my chance of making a vulnerable person sick? And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's that there's a lot of vulnerable people out there. It doesn't take much, and I think those of us that are indirect to consumer, whether we have a CSA, farmers market, farm stands, all of the above, we see the people. I mean, we've got CSA members that have been with us for 20 years. We've watched their kids grow up, so we definitely take serious providing them the same kind of safe, nutritious, and even beyond sort of the toxic, safety, of not having manure or compost or other hazards on the produce. But we also think we're getting rid of some of the chronic problems associated with systemic pesticides and synthetics. So we sort of have that mindset. It's just expanded a little bit more to think about the other pathogens that exist. And they're not all bad, but they are hazards. And identify them. We know as organic farmers, if you're certified organic, and even FDA is currently saying, follow the rules relative to manure organic. So 180 days if it's going to contact the edible portion of the crop, 90 days if it doesn't contact the edible portion of the crop. That's a good, safe bet safe-ish bet around manure use. But on some crops, maybe you shouldn't think of other sources. And if you're using bagged elements, those are typically heat treated, so they have a lower risk inherently. But still, I know there's some compost tea. A lot of folks are using compost tea. Maybe applying that pretty close to harvest. I don't know. I don't know that is necessarily a hazard, but I think it's reasonably foreseeable. So whether you can do some kind of testing to be proactive. If I was a compost tea user and I wanted to assure my consumers and my regulators or inspectors, maybe I would do some testing of that compost tea to assure that it didn't have any harmful pathogens, or otherwise make sure that I had a time period, an interval between application and harvest that was adequate, to create an adequate, log die-off where the pathogens, would not be alive by the time they get to harvest. So anyway, any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of adjourning. Jason,
That's
I'll
right.
leave it to you to make the call.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I think, it's the updates are coming, and it's I think the clarification for me that's helpful that you ran through is the qualifications of what sized farm and operation I would need to have, because I think that really perks up people's ears the most, and people need to know where they stand in this, particularly. So I think that's a very helpful update. Is just to see it as well, just to see where I stand and where I might not have to comply. Because I remember when this came about, we all were concerned, and then the clarification began to come along. And so I'm interested to see the water one, because I could see how it could be, they could clamp down tight on a lot of farmers, and you need to know how. So yeah, so thank you very much for the update. And
yeah,
2 weeks ago, I was in Phoenix at the International Association of Food Professionals meeting, and I was on a panel to talk about the water rule. So we were in sort of a similar situation where we had this anticipation when that event, where that panel session was scheduled, where we would all talk about our, what we thought of this new water rule and what was good, bad, or indifferent about it. But then we all flew to Phoenix and didn't have any insight. So, so I'm afraid we don't have any. But I think an important thing is most of us aren't. Most farms in New England are exempt, qualified exempt, and most farms in the country are, right? I mean, 80% of us only grow 20% of the food, and the 20% that grow the 80%, well, they'll be covered, and they have big risk footprints, and their lapses can have big impacts in public health and safety. Yeah. One thing to remember is that pathogens don't care what size your farm is, and if you just think of a few things you can do. Wash your hands before you touch the food. Wash your hands. I've got a gray leaf mold in my high tunnel because it was so flipping humid this year, and we just couldn't put enough fans in there to beat that back. And I put it in another house because I did not sanitize my pruning shears from one house to the next. So I put it right in my backup house. And so again, that if that had been, that could just easily been a food safety issue, right? As opposed to a yield issue now. But thank you for those you joined us, and for by the time this probably gets out on the interwebs and people are looking at it, it won't matter because we'll have a water rule. So
all right.
So anyway, thank you very much, Jason. Suzette, thank you. And I'll give you a few more links, I think, for that add-on. And we'll, if it's all right, Jason, when the water rule does come out, perhaps we can do some other, post or update to this because
Yeah.
I know I often go back to these presentations for information in the future.
Great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All
Thank
right.
you. And thank you, Suzette, for the support.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
right.
Thank you.
Oh.
Bye,
Bye.
Janice. Good luck, Janice.
Have a good day.
Yeah.